So welcome to episode 3 of High Street Histories, and in this episode we're going to be looking at what might be the oldest house in town, aren't we, Ivan?
Indeed we are, yeah. This is number 36, the High Street, and it's a listed building. It's a Grade 2 listed building, and it's reputed to be the oldest building in Lowestoft, dating from the middle of the 15th century. The rear part probably dates from the 1400s. Right. And this bit that you see on the front, the overhanging of the street, is probably a later addition. These are all probabilities, built out over a yard at the front of the older building at the back. This probably dates from the mid-16th century, and it's a very interesting building.
What would it have been built for? Would it have been a house to live in?
Yes, it would have been, originally would have been quite a grand dwelling house, but in later years, certainly by the early 19th century, the late 18th, early 19th century, it was a public house. It had also been a shop. Prior to that, it was a public house called the Georgian Dragon in the early 1800s, and then later known as the Norwich Arms.
So this is when it was a shop in...
This was when it was a shop, and the owner of the Mr. Gaskin was a wholesale confectioner, and he made sweets basically and sold them wholesale, but he also extended his property into number 35 next door and knocked through. So at the time there was the two buildings were joined to one, but you can see it's changed a lot. One of the interesting architectural features there, you can see that the front of the overhang is supported by these wonderful cast iron pillars that actually support them. It's a very, very, very interesting building. It's changed a lot since Mr. Gaskin had it.
It's a pity we can't see in the shop windows. They've just gone for the big lettering over there, isn't it? We can't look in, can we? But
no, that's because it was basically a sweet factory.
Oh, I see.
Okay. So that's why it's not a shop in the sense you could go in and buy your sweets and confectionery.
Yeah.
Mr. Gaskin was actually producing different sweets and confectionery in that property.
It does look more like, now you say that, it does look more like a factory, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's got a kind of look about it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that the front of the shop, from the last picture we saw, is still pretty much the same, isn't it?
Yes, being a Grade 2 listed building, obviously you can't, the owners can't make radical changes to the building itself, physical changes.
Yeah. So this is a wider view of the street, isn't it?
This is a wider view of the street, much later.
And where is the oldest house?
The oldest house is it's quite prominent with the car outside.
Oh, I see.
And it's still Gaskin's, and he still owns, so that's 36 and 35, the High Street.
So that's after the last picture, is it?
Yes, it's difficult to put an exact date on it, probably in the late 1940s. The previous one was from the 1930s, I should think.
Yeah.
But Mr. Gaskin is still there.
Still there, he's given it a coat of paint.
Yeah, and I think probably as well he's opened up the shop.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
He's got a little awning outside.
Yeah. And that must be his car parked out the front as well.
A bit further down the street, the big building, the stalls.
Yeah, that's a fascinating building. It's gone now, as we shall see. It probably dates from the 18th century, and judging by this parapet here, at some point an extra story has been added, and it was a very, very high quality Georgian house at one time, and in the late 1800s it was became a hotel. It became the Seaview Temperance Hotel. So if you want to stay there, there was no alcohol on the premises.
Okay.
And it was later, when the hotel business folded in the early 20th century, it was taken over by a Mr. Smith, who was a furniture dealer. And so it was Smith's Furniture Emporium. And much to his shame, he actually knocked a hole in the front of it to put a shop front in.
Okay.
So it's a building that has evolved. It's a fascinating building.
Well, you can imagine it being, in its day, a hotel. It's got a look of a hotel, but
Yeah.
obviously it looks quite sad
Yeah.
for itself there.
Yeah.
But you can imagine it also being used, because it would have been quite a big building, as a warehouse for effectively for the
Oh, yes,
furniture.
yeah.
couldn't you?
Yeah,
Which
and Mr. Smith also had the two buildings to the south of that. And if you look at, again, quite often if you're studying the history of buildings, you want to see how they've changed. Look up to the roof lines. And you can see here, this is a perfect example. Judging by the front, it's one continuous building. But if you look at the roof line, you can see it's definitely was once two separate buildings.
Yeah.
And there are clues there. And when this was the Temperance Hotel, Mr. Smith had a furniture shop and a pawn shop here.
Yeah.
So he obviously went up market and bought up the hotel when it closed, and moved his business into there.
Yeah.
So, but of course all of that, as with so many things, has changed. And
It does look like it's about something's about to happen in that photo, because it's sort of, both of those buildings are falling down. Really,
and they are in the process of being demolished.
But they didn't suffer damage during the Second World War then with a bombing raid or anything.
No,
It just was they weren't looked after, and they were kind of falling down.
Yeah, and so.
Oh, of course.
You look at it today, here we've got some rather brutal 1950s
Yes,
architecture.
when you actually look closely at that row of buildings, you can just see how they're much flatter buildings. They haven't got the same style, have they, at all? And so that they would have been built in the
late 50s, I should think, early 60s. You can see this is where the hotel, Smith's Furniture Emporium was, and here, still quite prominent, is number 36, the oldest house.